Howdy, and welcome to the Feed Bandit Podcast, where we talk all things hunting and introduce you to the most innovative hunting gear and services. Here are your hosts, Jimmy Byrne and Richard Kinchlow. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit Podcast. Jimmy here. I'm riding solo today on this particular episode. I found an interesting article that I think all you guys out there might find of interest. It's since it's summertime, we're kind of on the the lull, if you will, before the hunting season starts up again. And I don't know about you guys, but right now I'm kind of in the stage of eating down a lot of the meat that's in my freezer. That's funny because I use that phrase a lot. I'll say it to my wife. I'll say, "No, I need to eat down my meat." And for whatever reason, that's like one of her buzz phrases. It just annoys her. But typically because, she's wanting to, I don't know, make some other recipe or some other thing for dinner. And I say, nah, I'd rather eat my venison. So sometimes we got to negotiate, I guess, if you will, what we're eating for dinner. But anyway, I'm fully into the process of doing that right now. Eating a lot of it, getting ready for the next hunting season. I figured out that I just this week ate the last of the back straps that I had from last season. I don't have any tenderloins left. So I'm down to basically the ground meat that we typically make. So Richard and I, some of the guys, what we typically do is we save a lot of our quarters and save them up, and then come the springtime, we do a huge grind where we make some amazing ground meat ourselves. It takes a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun because we are doing it together, drinking a lot of beer, smoking cigars, and which is we joke that sometimes cigar ash might be the secret ingredient to a good grind, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. But as it gets later on into the night, sometimes that's hard. But anyway, making your own grind and grinding it with pork and sometimes making a little adding some spices and making a little recipe into the grind. It's really fun. So we do that a lot, and I'm kind of down to the grind that we had from last year. That's pretty much left. So I'll be eating a lot of burgers. You can use it for meat and spaghetti. It's really good. Last week, my wife made an amazing meatloaf. I mean, that's always a classic. I use it for taco meat. I mean, anything you can use grind for, right? So it's awesome. It's fun to have that venison grind in there. But anyway, I found an article that I thought was interesting that maybe I could talk about here and kind of help refresh our memory or our thoughts about how we handle our meat and store it. I found it on Realtree.com, and it's titled, "Is That Venison Freezer Burned?" And the subheading is, "What is that gray chunk at the bottom of your freezer?" And the bigger question, is it safe to eat it? Here's what hunters should know about long-term storage of their game meat. So that caught my eye. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I remember from the beginning of when I started hunting, now it was right after college for me. I've experimented a lot in how to preserve my meat, and I've used almost every method. And they actually talk about a different method in here that is interesting. I hadn't heard of. I'm probably not going to use it because I have my own method that's working now, and I'll walk through that. And they actually mentioned it in here, which we'll get to. But it's funny. I've gone through all the growing pains of figuring out how the best way to handle your meat and store your meat. So some of the mistakes, I've done, and kind of what they talk about here, I've done. But let's go through this and talk about it. So the article starts, "It's summertime. For us hunters, that means a few things. It's time to check gear, hang a few cameras, put in some range time with your bow or gun, and finish off last season's wild game to make room for the upcoming bounty of fresh meat that the fall seasons hopefully will bring." There, that's what I was just talking about, is, finishing that, eating down that meat that's in your freezer. Continuing, "By this time of the year, all of the choice cuts like backstraps, inside loins, and top rounds are long gone. Memories of fantastic meals gone by. What's left in the bottom are gray, frosty chunks of meat that have been exposed to the ravages of freezer air that might be barely recognizable. Should you just throw them out, or is there a way to salvage them? And of course, I have a picture here of a horribly freezer burn. looks like a back quarter or something. And it says ice crystals form on the surface of meat exposed to dry freezer air. So the article goes on the cause. Freezer burn occurs when the cold, dry air of the freezer contacts the surface of the meat. Think of it like a sub-zero dehydrator. Moisture from the meat gets sucked into the freezer's dry air, leaving outside of it gray and parched like jerky. Besides the surface desiccation, meat that gets exposed to freezer air also loses moisture as the internal liquid, a mixture of water and a protein called myoglobin, freezes into jagged ice crystals that slice and burn the cell walls, holding it inside the meat. As the meat thaws, the myoglobin leaks out from the fractured cells, leaving that roast, steak, or ground meat much less juicy than when fresh. So there's another picture of it thawed. Here's a freezer burn on thawed meat shows up as gray or brown on the surface. So I've seen that before. I'm sure all of you listening have seen that before on your meat. It's not fun when you pull out a piece and you see that and you're like, oh no. But let's continue here. The title of the next section is Freezer Burn Meat Safe to Eat? It goes on, luckily, freezer burn isn't dangerous. It just lowers the quality and flavor of the meat. For mild cases, simply trim away the off-colored portion from the exterior of the cut, then cook as normal. The longer a piece of meat stays exposed to freezer air, the deeper the damage goes. After several months, the damage can reach so deep that there isn't enough usable meat remaining to be salvaged. I'm sure you've been there. I know I have before. I mean, there's been often times where you get and it's kind of like gross brown film layer on top. And I've just cut that off, just like the article says, and you expose that beautiful red in there. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but typically meat does not last in my freezer longer than a year at the most. Now, sometimes, like it was kind of mentioned before at the beginning of this article, when you have a ton of meat in your freezer and you're digging through, sometimes a piece of meat might somehow work its way down to the very bottom, and then maybe 2 years you go in and you're like, I need to, thaw out my freezer or something, or you're going through the meat to see what's in there, and you find one that is dated, maybe 2 years ago or something like that. And you pull that baby out and you open it up and, it's brown, around the outside and whatnot. But, I mean, don't just immediately discard it like the article says. I've numerous times have cut off that layer on top and still was left with a good piece of meat that I could use with something. So unless there's a date on there for like 3 or 4 years ago, like I've darn near probably eaten meat that's over 2 years, just cutting that exterior kind of film off. So that's something to consider when you're going through your freezer. But let's continue on this. Again, it says trim away freezer burn portion of the meat to make it usable. Yeah, get down to that red again because you'll see it and it'll still be good, nice and tasty. But it says how to prevent freezer burn. Well, it says you can't. So over time, all frozen meat will eventually show signs of freezer burn. But what we can do is slow down the process by limiting the amount of air that contacts the meat. The better the barrier, the longer the meat will remain in top condition. The old standby of double wrapping with freezer paper will get you 2 to 4 months. Since the paper doesn't conform to the shape of the meat's surface, small pockets of air exist inside the packaging and will pull moisture from the meat. A step up from paper is a suction-style vacuum sealer. This type of sealer uses a pump to suck the air from the meat, then seals the package with a heat strip. The system works well, leaving very few air pockets inside the sealed package. Now, of course, when using a pump-style sealer, you got to make sure your seals are complete. This is one problem that I found. I've gone through, 2 vacuum pump sealers in my life so far. Both have worked well for maybe a season. But, the more and more you use them, and maybe it's because, I don't know, they weren't the top of the line, but they weren't, cheap either. But the more and more I use them, the more and more, it's sucking up the moisture and all this, and the blood or whatever gets, and the water gets in there into the the heat strip and the sealer and whatnot, it kind of loses that. It kind of breaks down itself. So the ability to form a solid seal there diminishes, or it has, at least in the ones that I've used. And so I found, 1 or 2 seasons later, I'm using that heat sealer and I just can't get that proper seal in there to keep it sealed. And I finally, 3 or 4 years ago, I finally said, screw it, I'm done with these heat sealers, because they just, one, it's also kind of a pain. I mean, you got to get the bags out, you cut the bags down to size, put the stuff in there, throw it in the heat sealer, hope that the seal works. And I've noticed several times, and we're about to go into this where they kind of talk about this, and this is probably what happened to me, that, I'll open the freezer, 6 months later or 8 months later, and I'll go to grab one of these heat sealed bags and everything, and sure enough, there'll be frost on the stuff that's in there. Why? Because the seal failed or whatever, and it built up all the crystals on the outside of the meat. And I'll be like, what the heck? So I've transitioned to a much simpler but easier and a way that actually works, so well for me. And the article actually gets to it, but let's continue here. But vacuum seals degrade slightly over time, and the constant shuffling of packages as you search for that pack of mallard breasts you're certain should be somewhere near the bottom of the freezer can tear the bags or break open the seals, exposing the meat. Again, that's what I was just talking about. It's happened to me 100 times, and it's really annoying. Continuing. The best way to package your valuable game meat is to use a chamber-style vacuum sealer. Okay, so this is the new method that I hadn't really thought of or noticed or anything, so let's go through this. Unlike the suction style, chamber sealers produce a nearly complete vacuum inside the machine, removing all air from both inside and around the package. And this is Matt Kinnamore, Director of Brand Management and Marketing for American Outdoor Brands, the parent company of meat, explains it this way. Quote, unlike a regular vacuum sealer, a chamber vacuum sealer pumps all the air, including air inside the bag, out of the chamber at once, giving your item a truly airtight seal. The sealing process ends with the machine heating the edges to fuse the bag and prevent air from coming inside. Unquote. And it has a picture of this big machine. It says that a chamber sealer does the best job of protecting meat for long-term storage. So this article is obviously couched as, or it's subtly a promotion of buying one of these chamber sealers. But see, here's the deal. I get it, but still seems like you might have the same problem, when you're rummaging around in your freezer for meat, where they'll rub against each other and maybe that seal will break. I don't know. I guess they're claiming that it seals better than the other vacuum sealer, but I don't see what it's going to be that big a deal.
Hey, hold on one quick moment. Hey folks, have you ever wished that there was an easier way to find the hunting feeds, supplies, and services you need, when and where you need them? If so, check out our hunter search at feedbandit.com, where you can see what hunting suppliers are in your area or are on the way to your land. Don't waste any more precious time searching Google or calling around for feed, blinds, feeders, or even outfitters. Just use our targeted search for hunters, the Feed Bandit Hunter Search, over at feedbandit.com. We'll find your feed.
But let's just continue here. While chamber sealers are the best for long-term storage, they claim, there are some downsides. One, they're big. You aren't going to stick one in an empty cabinet or drawer when you're not using it. Next is the cost. You can get a high-quality suction-style sealer for less than $150, which is what I've been using. But many chamber styles run $1,000 or more. Yeah, there ain't no way I'm probably going to use this. Well, I don't need to, again, because I'll explain what I do. They are also slower. For most, the full cycle from pumping out the air to sealing to releasing the vacuum takes a minute or two. I can finish 2 or 3 packages with my suction-style sealers in the time it takes to run one full cycle of the chamber style. Still, the chamber sealer does have the ability to seal multiple packages at once, which can help balance out the extended processing time. You'll save some money on bags as well. Chamber-style bags often go for less than half the cost of comparably sized suction bags. If you regularly process your wild game with the same group of family or friends, chipping in on one together is worth considering. Okay, so they're saying the bags are cheaper than the conventional suction bags. Well, if the bags are cheaper, does it mean they're lower quality? And if they're lower quality, would they then break apart when rummaging in the freezer? I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to hear, does anyone listening have one of these chamber sealers, and have you ever had any problems? Number one. And number two, how long can you store the meat with one of these things? That would be interesting to hear. But anyway, continuing. Besides packaging, there are a few other things you can do to cut down on freezer burn. Start with organizing your freezer. Every time you shuffle through it, you risk tearing up a package or busting the seal on your vacuum packaging. Stack your meat by cut or by species in plastic tubes or milk crates so that you can move them around in bulk and go directly to what you want to cook for dinner. That's a pretty good idea. I typically try to do that, but I don't use containers to put them in or anything like that. So then over time, as I pull something out, things settle and blah, blah, blah. So, over 4 or 6 months, it's all jumbled and mixed together. But I'll go in and I'll reorganize, putting the older things I know on top so I can eat those first, this type of thing. So, in general, that's probably a pretty good idea. So you just pick off the top instead of having to rummage to the bottom to find, whatever it is that you need. But it seems like regardless, we're going to have the problem of, things like hitting each other and possibility of, compromising a vacuum sealed bag, no matter which, place, method you use. But continuing, the faster the meat freezes, the smaller the ice crystals and less damage done to the internal cells, which means a juicier finished product. Commercial product producers use blast chilling to freeze meat in minutes, cutting down on the size of the crystals that form. Since most of us don't have a blast chiller in the basement, try these tips to get your meat frozen in a hurry. Break down cuts you expect to keep the longest into meal-sized portions. Okay, that's a good one. That's what I do. So I'll take you have a typical long back strap on a deer. Most people don't put the whole thing in together, I wouldn't imagine. I definitely don't, but what I'll do is I typically cut that thing, depending on the size of the deer. If you're taking a big, good deer, I typically, what I'll do is cut those things into thirds. And then the skinnier tip, what I'll do is I'll just kind of leave that as is, But then as I get to the bigger end, the thicker end, I like to slice them down the middle. And that to me makes a pretty good little steak. Sometimes, and I'll just cook both of them, where I didn't really probably need to do that. And then I'll keep the middle portion probably together a lot of times, because that's the portion that I end up using a lot of times for bacon wrap, throwing it in the oven, put it in there for, I'll do 350 for 20 minutes, and then baking for 20 minutes. And then I'll do 10 minutes on broil to kind of cook that bacon a little better. And then pull that baby out and you're done. It's beautiful. So I'll do that. Cut them into meal-sized portions and then freeze them that way. And that way, what you pull out to thaw, you eat in that one meal. And it's not kind of sitting in your fridge for too long again. The next one is, they say, or I'll go on with the article, thoroughly chill the meat in the refrigerator or in a walk-in cooler before freezing to cut down on the time it takes to freeze all the way through. Okay, well, that's interesting. I typically do that. One of the things that I do to kind of save time, as an aside here, is, after we shoot the deer, we'll put it in a cooler, like a walk-in cooler, like overnight. And then the next day, but what I do is, for the prime cuts especially, is I'll immediately put those in gallon-size freezer bags. And the reason why I do that is because it's similar to what they're talking about here. When it's exposed to that cold air, the outside of the meat gets that kind of hard layer on it. But if you put them in gallon-sized bags, then it prevents that layer from building up. So what I'll do then the next day is I'll pull them out, and then I'll trim off all the silver skin and all the other extra crap on there. And then I'll throw them back into gallon-size freezer bags and put them back in the cooler until I get home, basically. And then when I get home, see, I've already trimmed them, so I don't really need to do any kind of trim work or anything like that. Then I'll leave them in a fresh gallon-sized freezer bag in the fridge for probably 3 days to a week, depending on. I'll watch to see how much blood is coming out and empty the blood until they get that pink color, but inside of the gallon-sized bag in the fridge. And then what I'll do is I'll pull them out and do what they talk about here. So they'll be chilled before I throw them in the freezer. And I'll tell you how I freeze them shortly. Let's see. It says, if possible, add a few pieces of meat to the freezer at a time. Overloading the space raises the temperature and insulates the meat at the center of the pile, extending freeze time. Oh, that's interesting. So then there's the freezer itself. Deep freeze units, chest freezers in particular, can maintain a much colder temperature than the standard freezer in your kitchen refrigerator. So keep yours set at the lowest temperature possible when adding unfrozen meat. It's good to know. And when it comes to freezer paper, wrap the meat in plastic wrap before wrapping in paper for longer storage times. See, this right here, that one sentence is the most important sentence of this article, because that's exactly what I do. So what I'll do, I just got done talking about my process. So after I've let it bleed out, I then take the plastic wrap and I'll wrap these puppies, each one into meal size, pretty dang thoroughly. So what I'll do is I'll put that piece of meat on that plastic wrap, put the roll out, put the end of the plastic wrap on the table, keep it attached to the roll, and I'll put that piece of meat in the middle, and then I'll start rolling it into the plastic wrap. But while I'm doing that, I'm kind of pushing out as much air as possible. Okay? And then I'll fold in the sides and keep rolling it, fold in the sides, keep rolling it, but the whole time pushing out as much air as possible until it's dang near where you can barely see the meat because of the plastic. So, I mean, I make it, very, pretty thick on there. And then that dude is where I'll wrap in freezer paper. So then I'll take that white freezer paper and then wrap that pretty tight into that freezer paper, put a piece of tape on it. I'll put the month and the year and what it is. And then that sucker can sit in there. Literally, I've had them sit in there for over a year and a half. I've eaten 2-year-old meat in there when I thawed it and pulled it out. There's barely any brown in it. So something as simple as that, cheap. You don't have to buy a vacuum thing or anything like that. You don't have to spend $1,000 on a chamber sealer or any of that stuff. Just get you a roll of freezer paper and a roll or two of plastic wrap and use those, and that right there will help you out. Let me just finish off this article, but now you have the key. You have the key to success. So, continuing. With a suction-style vacuum sealer, double seal both ends of the bag for an added barrier against premature opening. For bone-in cuts, like shanks, wrap the bone ends with an extra layer of freezer bag or a clean plastic before sealing to prevent sharp bone edges from poking through. Yeah, so my method, or the method of wrapping in plastic, applies to everything. I've wrapped full hams, bone-in, shoulders, everything, with the bones and everything. You wrap them enough, there's going to be that kind of padding from the plastic. It's not gonna bother any other of the meat in the freezer. Let's see. So if you're like us, you have more than one freezer going. Hang a dry erase board on the outside of each to track what the contents are and what date they're placed there. Or if you just write on them like I do, you'll know. Knowing that the venison top round you need for your timber to table recipe is freezer A cuts down on the rummaging that can ding your packages. Okay, well, that's a good point. Simply adjust the content and cut numbers whenever you add or remove something. Noting the package dates lets you always use the oldest package first, which is kind of what I was talking about that I do. Nothing will make your game meat last forever, but following these tips will maintain it in top shape for several months and even up to a year, plenty long enough to turn it into tasty wild game recipes, and just in time to start filling those freezers back up for the next season. So like I said, if you do it right and you wrap them really tight, pushing out as much air as possible in the plastic wrap, and then putting it into the paper, freezer paper, you can go well over a year with your meat. I've been able to and had no problems whatsoever with that. Even 2 years. I don't really want to go further than that. That just meant that, I don't know, I guess I was being distracted and eating too much of other types of meats or something else where I couldn't get to my venison. But yeah, I mean it's not rocket science. You don't need to spend a lot of money on sealant systems or anything like that. Just get the old-fashioned plastic paper and freezer paper, and there you go. That alone right there will help you. Oh yeah, and cut them down to meal-sized portions, and wrap them in meal-sized portions. And that right there will help you maintain your meat and no longer have freezer burn. If you ever see freezer burn on your meat, assuming you eat it within a reasonable amount of time, you're not waiting 5 to 10 years to eat it. That's all I have on that. One thing I'd want to encourage everybody listening. Check out or let us know what you think about what I said first here, what this article is saying. If you have a different method of, packing up your meat and sitting it in the freezer, I'd love to hear it. Maybe easier and more simple than what I do with the plastic wrap in the freezer paper. Please let us know. Also, if you use one of those chamber sealers, I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on there. I mean, was it really $1,000? Wow. Anyway, let us know what y'all think. You can always go over to feedbanditpodcast.com. You can leave us a voicemail if you don't want to shoot us an email on with your feedback. We'd love to hear from you there. Or email us at howdy@feedbandit.com and let us know what you think. We're always open to new ideas and love to hear, what's what new methods and whatnot. It's very interesting for us. We love to share them with our followers too. So please let us know. And I was just started saying this, but I also want to remind everybody, check out our gear page at feedbandit.com. You can also go straight there to feedbandit.com/gear, GEAR, and that will take you to our gear page where we've been adding products on there from folks that you may have heard us talk to on the podcast in the past. You check out those pages and find out about their products, and but each one of them has a special little deal for you guys if you decide to avail yourself of their cool products and services. So go over there, feedbandit.com. You get to the gear page from the homepage under Bandit Gear and Services, or just go feedbandit.com/gear, and that'll take you straight there. All right, guys, with that, good luck and happy eating down your venison and your game meat this summer. And hopefully we'll be able to replenish that bounty come the fall. With that, guys, I will leave you and hope to talk to you or hear from you guys feedback-wise, and talk to you on the next Feed Bandit podcast. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Feed Bandit Podcast. If you like what we discuss on the show, be sure to sign up to our email list to get even more killer hunting ideas, tips, tricks, and exclusive deals on innovative hunting gear and services delivered straight to your inbox. Sign up over at feedbandit.com or simply by texting the word bandit to 33777. See you on the next one, and remember, support your local feed store.